Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm your host, Cody Goodwin. Got a fun show for you guys today. Alabama plays the Missouri Tigers this weekend at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Number 15 ranked Tide, 21st ranked Tigers. Kickoff set for 2:30 Central on ABC. It's something of a playoff elimination game, right? Given that the Tide are now 5-2 overall and 3 losses absolutely eliminates them from the new 12-team college football playoff. Missouri enters at 6-1, but they don't really have a lot of big game opportunities left on their 2024 schedule after this game. So it's a big one for both sides is the point I'm trying to make here. They both need a win, and especially Alabama, which gets a bye week afterwards, and then a trip to Baton Rouge to kick off the final 4 games of their 2024 schedule. To preview this matchup, I tapped back into the power of the 24/7 Sports Network, connected with Gabe DeArmond from Power Mizzou, our brand new 24/7 Sports Mizzou website. Gabe and his gang have been covering Mizzou forever, and they've been a website I've actually read on and off over the years while growing up in Kansas City. So Gabe is as knowledgeable as it gets on the Tigers, and he and I spent about 30 or so minutes discussing this Alabama-Mizzou matchup. It's a great conversation, and I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Let's go to Gabe now. As promised, Gabe DeArmond from Power Mizzou, the newest website, newest member, the 24/7 Sports family. Gabe, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How long are we going to be the new kid on the block? Like, is somebody else going to come in here and we won't be the new people? I mean, Missouri's still new to the SEC, according to most people. So
when I first joined, so this is only my second football season covering Alabama. So I'm still, I guess you guys replaced me as the new kid on the block.
Okay.
But I was also kind of surprised that like 24/7 had, some dedicated, this is going to sound like a shot and it's not, but maybe it kind of is. I'm surprised that 24/7 had a dedicated like Vanderbilt writer and not exactly a dedicated Missouri writer. And then the more time you spend in the, 24/7 rivals on 3 space, it's like, well, it's either you guys or bust. So we're glad that you guys are finally on the team.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. Everything's been good. Somewhere that covers every school in the league now, and get to look. I'm pretty old to be meeting new people, but we're doing a lot of it this month. So.
Hopefully, I'm one of the last to give you guys the official welcome to 24/7. Let's talk some Mizzou. Tigers are 6-1. Had a comeback win over Auburn, where they overcame some self-inflicted mistakes, but also some pretty major injuries. I thought just kind of watching that game. They have an overtime win over Vanderbilt. They have a comeback win over Boston College. They are more or less where I think a lot of us who have, followed the SEC kind of thought that they would be at this point in the season. I like to start these things with a vibe check, Gabe. So what's kind of the vibe around Mizzou 7 games into the season?
They've made it here. Like you said, the goal was 6-1, 7-0 coming to Tuscaloosa. So they got there. The way they got there, I would say, has disappointed most people. Most fans don't feel very good about this season so far. And even Eli Drinkwitz has said, going into the A&M game, hey, we're as good as we can be record-wise, but we're not playing anywhere near as well as we can play. And I think that's what most people would say. I mean, that Vandy win, especially probably to Alabama fans, now looks a little bit better than it did at the time. The BC win, like you thought it was going to be good, and they've kind of fallen on their face a little bit. The big problem is just it wasn't a loss at A&M. It was just a completely uncompetitive football game at A&M, and I think that's the problem. I mean, the oddity is coming into this season, a big reason a lot of people thought Missouri was a playoff team was the schedule. And now week 8 or whatever it is, a big reason people think Missouri's not going to be a playoff team is the schedule. And especially because that game hung over this program at least until last week. And when Brady Cook did what he did.
Yeah, no, they seem to be. So we pegged Missouri as kind of a dangerous team coming in, like because of the schedule, because of the personnel that they had coming back. I know Cody Schrader was a huge part of the offense and what they did last year, but you go out and you get Nate Noel, you still got Brady Cook, you've still got Luther Burden. Theo Weiss, I think, has been playing pretty well this season, all things considered. Dangerous team that seems to be living dangerously. I mean, you mentioned the A&M game, but even then, like Vanderbilt, that win looks better, right, in hindsight, but like that's an overtime game against a scrappy team. Boston College was playing really well at the beginning of the season. They seem to have maybe regressed to the mean a little bit. We saw what happened last week against Auburn. Let me try this too. As somebody who grew up in Kansas City, kind of watching, Mizzou, KU, K-State,
Right.
Missouri seems like the program that, like, when they go into a season with expectations, bad things happen. When they go into a season without expectations, good things happen. I guess, I don't know. From there, where would you like to take it?
A lot of Missouri fans feel that way, right? They don't like to be ranked. They like to complain about not being ranked, but ultimately they like to not be ranked because, like, Missouri's had two teams that were within a half of a national title game in 07 and 13. Neither of those teams started the season in the top 25. In fact, I don't think we're in the top 25 till like the fifth week of the season. And then they get expectations, and Missouri fans start to say, oh, there's pressure here, and this rarely goes well. And I understand it. There's some truth to it. But if the SEC is like an NFL light, which I kind of think it is, you look around this league and you're like, yeah, I don't know. On any given day, number 15 could beat number 2 in this league, I think. And I don't think it would shock a lot of people. And that's how the NFL is. I have people get mad at me because I make a lot of Chiefs analogies, but as a Kansas City guy, you might appreciate that. I mean, every week right now is, well, I don't think the Chiefs are any good, but they're 6-0. Every week for Missouri is, they don't look very good. They should be better than this, but ultimately, I guess they're 6-1 and theoretically in position to get where they want to get. It's just that I don't think very many people have watched this team play and think they can get there.
That's similar to Alabama, especially before they lost Tennessee last week. It's like, hey, let's, pump the brakes a little bit. They're 5-1, which is kind of where we thought they'd be 6 games into the season. Similar to Mizzou, it hasn't really looked the way we thought it might look this season, but all their goals are still in front of them. I think that's one of the interesting parts of this game specifically. I don't want to call it a playoff elimination game, right? Because it might be, right? Because if Alabama loses, that's 3 losses. I just don't see them being able to climb back up that hill. With Mizzou, a loss drops them to 6-2, but you look at the way the playoff committee has maybe, they value wins, right? And I just don't know that there's a ton of opportunity left for Mizzou moving forward.
Well, they value not only wins, but good wins. I mean, Missouri could be 10-2 and legitimately get to the end of the season and go, the best win was Vanderbilt, which is not a bad win,
right?
But that's not a playoff resume, especially when every other team I ran numbers earlier this week. There's 8 SEC teams that could get to 10-2. We know they're not all going to get there, but 5 or 6 of them might. And if you're the 5th or 6th SEC team with 10 wins and you're looking, go, well, Tennessee beat Bama and Bama beat Georgia and, Texas did this, whatever. Then all of a sudden you go, who'd Missouri beat? And you go, we got that win at South Carolina. I mean, it's fine. It's a good season, but it's not a playoff resume.
Well, let me ask you this too, because I know that Mizzou has a little bit of a history of this. Last year, for example, right? They take care of business. They go play a very, very good Georgia team, right? And the comments, I think, coming out of Georgia's camp following that game, right? The Bulldogs win, but their comments coming out of that camp is they showed a lot of stuff on both sides of the ball that they had not shown on film previously. I had wondered early in the season if Mizzou was maybe playing a little bit of that game to get ready for A&M, to get ready for Alabama. And then obviously the A&M result goes the way it goes. So, okay, hand wave that away a little bit. Is there a possibility that maybe Mizzou could unveil some stuff that they haven't seen yet? Or what do you think maybe the issue is of them kind of playing below what you think their expectations should be?
I mean, I guess there could be a play or a package, right? But if you get into the 9th week of the season before you're showing the good stuff, I think a lot of Missouri fans will go, hey, some of that might have been handy in College Station when you were getting run off the field at Kyle, So I think they mostly are what the hope for Missouri is that there is a level to this passing game we haven't seen, because we thought this was, the receiving corps coming out of spring football was openly saying we want to be the best receiving corps in the country. They just haven't been. Now, is part of that's Brady Cook hasn't played as well as he played last year, so part of it's the offensive line that went and got these 2 big guys on the left side out of the portal. Neither of those guys has played as well as anticipated. So it's all interconnected. But we came into the season talking Biletnikoff, maybe Heisman invite for Luther Burden. at this point, he's not even the leading receiver on the team. He's not an all SEC guy. Brady struggled until last week. The flip side of this is the hope, and Brady Cook mentioned it at the post-game press conference. The hope is that not just winning last week, but winning the way they won kind of unlocks something for this team, right? It happened last year, week 3, they beat Kansas State on a 61-yard field goal on the last play of the game. And it wasn't just that they won the game. I mean, Kansas State was ranked 17th. It was a nice win, but it was the way they won it. And then a couple weeks later, they got beat by LSU when Jaden Daniels just put on a Jaden Daniels performance. But then the week after that, they go to Kentucky. They're down 14-0. They get a fake punt that flips the whole game. And from that point, the rest of the season, Missouri was just convinced it was going to win every time it stepped on the football field. Like, none of us thought they were winning at Georgia, but they fully went down thinking they were going to win that game, and were in position to do it through a pick at midfield with about 5 minutes left that flipped things. So that's what they hope last week does for them, right? It just kind of unlocks this mindset of, I think the way Brady put it was a moment that this team hasn't had yet. So we'll see what that means going to Tuscaloosa with a beat up quarterback, a running back who might not play. And I mean, I've been saying for 4 weeks, I'm not sure you really want to go to Alabama having to win to save your season, but that's where they're at.
Hey, welcome to life in the SEC, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned Brady Cook. I think that's a good transition to Mizzou's offense. A little underwhelming thus far. You laid all that out pretty well. But I wanted to talk health first. I know that the injury availability, in air quotes, came out Wednesday night. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon. Both Brady Cook, Nate Noel, handful of others listed as doubtful or just listed on the report in general. What can you tell us about Brady Cook's availability for this game? I know he's a key part of not just the offense and the execution, but also he just seems like the heart and soul of that team right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to know till Saturday at 2:31 or whatever, right? I would imagine he'll be listed as doubtful on Thursday night. Could be upgraded to questionable on Friday night, but probably more likely 90 minutes before game time when they put out that report, it's game time decision or something like that. But we have joked with Brady before. Like, I asked him last year, what would it take for you to come out of a football game? I mean, because this kid, he played 11 games in 2022 with a torn labrum in his throwing arm, so that's kind of a thing. And then last year he was all beat up and left a couple games very momentarily, came back in. And then Saturday spent the better part of 2.5 quarters in the hospital. Missouri put out its highlight reel and legitimately spliced in the hospital security camera footage of Brady limping into and limping out of the hospital. It was pretty good, but came back through the miracles of modern medicine, was on the football field and actually played as well as he's played all year. For him not to start, it will require the coaches going to him and saying, we cannot allow you to do this. Give us your helmet. We won't let you on the field. If they let him on the field, he's going to be on the field. Now, will he be effective? I don't know. But his quote after the game on Saturday was, I was in the hospital and I realized I have 2.5 games left at Faurot Field and I'm not missing this one. It's sitting in the hospital.
I could appreciate that. And we relayed bits and pieces of that story to some Alabama players and assistant coaches when we were meeting them during the week. And a lot of them were just like, man, that guy's a dog. Like, you're going to have to, like, would you wrap him up and you get him if he plays? Like, you got to put him on the ground. Just one of those dudes that is, like you said, like the coaches are going to have to take his helmet away from him if this is a guy that's not going to play in the game. The offense overall, though, underwhelming. You mentioned Luther Burden, who I still think, even if the numbers aren't there, probably the best pound for pound receiver that Alabama is going to play this year. I think he's obviously got that first round NFL draft pick type potential, all SEC type potential. Why do you think the offense has maybe been underwhelming this season for Missouri?
Well, I mean, they haven't hit anything deep, really. They had a 78-yard pass on Saturday, but it was a 10-yard pass that became a 78-yard pass, which, by the way, is legal, and the Missouri receivers haven't done that very often either. It's just been like everybody wants to look at. I actually was talking with Mike on our podcast earlier today, and everybody wants to identify one thing that's wrong, right? Because that's easy to fix. You can just go, hey, cool, we fixed that thing, we're good. Well, Brady's been inaccurate sometimes. Other times he hasn't had time to be accurate. Other times he's been accurate and they haven't made plays for him. So it's just one piece here and there. They haven't been very far off, but they have been off most of the year. And I think everybody's waiting for Luther to have that Teteroa McMillan day, right? Where he had 310 yards in the opener, and maybe not 300, but like you're waiting for that 200-yard day. He had one close to that against K-State last year, and we just haven't seen it. Last week, he didn't touch the ball till inside of 2 minutes in the first half, which is just inexcusable. I mean, put him at Wildcat, hand him the football, throw him a bubble script, whatever. Get the football in this kid's hands because he's by far your best player.
How much of a loss, I don't want to make it as simple as this, but like Cody Schrader was obviously a huge part of their offense last year and what they were able to do. How much does his loss and just the what he was able to do last year out of that position to maybe, I don't know, help calm Brady Cook down a little bit, to just give them an easy button to press on offense? Like, is it as simple as that maybe they're just missing that simple, easy button so far this season?
I think, and this sounds stupid because of the year Cody had, I think they miss him in the locker room more than they do on the football field. Like Nate Noel had almost 500 yards through 4 games. You know, they've run the ball fine this year. But Cody and on the other side of the ball, Darius Robinson were the guys that you just looked at, and the rest of the team said, lead me wherever you're going, I'm going there. If you lead me off a cliff, I will follow you off a cliff. And they haven't really had that. He was Brady's best friend on the team, you know, but like, let's be honest, Cody was undrafted and he's on a practice squad. Like, this is not an irreplaceable physical guy. But he obviously made himself into a hell of a football player. Like I said, they've run the ball fine. Last year, Cody didn't do a lot in the first 6 or 7 games of the year. Well, Missouri's passing game really hit. And what that forced teams to do, like by the time Tennessee came here, everybody was going, well, we can't let Brady Cook and Luther Burden and Theo Weiss beat us, so we're going to back up. And they just handed the ball to Cody Schrader 30 times a game, and he ran for 170 yards. So the hope was that because Nate Noel did well through 4 weeks, the teams might start to creep up and try to stop that a little bit, and then you could beat them over the top. Hasn't really happened yet. To be fair, the only 2 games they've played since the A&M game were UMass, which I just, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, you don't count anything in that game. And then the other one, their starting quarterback was in the hospital for 3 quarters. So I don't really know how much I take out of that either.
If it makes Mizzou fans who might be listening feel any better, Alabama has given up some sort of coverage bust touchdown, or at least a long down the field passing play each of the last 4 games. And then you bring in, you know, Luther Burden and Theo Weiss and Brady Cook. And I know that they've struggled to get the deep passing game going, but there might be some opportunity on Saturday just based on what Alabama has showed us this month. I don't know. Has the Mizzou camp talked about that at all, or what they might have seen on film that gives them, you know, maybe a little bit of confidence that they could do that this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, you know how that is. Anytime you ask, so what have you seen? They're great. They're physical. They do everything well, fly to the ball. They're not going to answer that question. But it's kind of interesting because I think both teams expect to maybe have a chance. Like, Missouri's actually given up the 2nd fewest big plays in the country on defense. But man, when they give up a big play, it is huge. They've given up like 4 or 5 touchdown passes of 48 yards or longer this year. And they don't give up any other big plays. Everything else is like 5 and 6 yards. But when they give up a big one, it absolutely changes everything. So I think there's going to be a lot of like Ryan Williams, Luther Burden eyes on, okay, which one of these guys can give you 75 yards in the first half and kind of change the game. And I mean, it'll do wonders for Missouri, just because it's kind of like sometimes you just got to see the ball go through the net, right? And Missouri hasn't seen the ball go through the net on a long pass very often.
That's at least one of the matchups. I know we'll talk a little bit more about the matchups in this game that you and I are keeping an eye on, but that's immediately one that sticks out to me. Missouri's defense has been very, very good this season, top 10 in total defense. They get off the field on 3rd down. They are dealing with a handful of injuries right now, at least based on the most recent injury report. And really, they've only had 1 game where I felt like that unit just was a no-show, and that was the A&M game earlier this year at Kyle Field. What can you say about the way that this defense has been playing? And they're doing all this under a new defensive coordinator as well, and Corey Batoon, who there's a connection there. He came from South Alabama, right, where Kane Womack, Alabama's defensive coordinator, right? They were both on the same staff there. Just what's impressed you the most about this Missouri defense?
This is going to sound weird, but like not one, they don't do anything exceptionally. I mean, even through the first 4 games of the year when they were 4-0 and had held everybody to 27 or less, and, you know, we're up in the top 10 in a lot of categories, they said it's just solid defense. Like, they didn't get a lot of tackles for loss. They weren't pressuring quarterbacks much. The cornerbacks weren't elite. It was just every play was just kind of 4 yards, 6 yards, 2 yards. They weren't giving up anything big. And when they did, it was, like I said, it was just the one thing. So I think they're pretty good at, I guess, containment. But last week, for the first time, the defensive line actually showed up. Like, we were starting to ask questions. How do you find a way to rush the passer? Because you're not getting it done with 4 guys. And then against Auburn, I mean, Zion Young, a defensive end transfer from Michigan State, had by far his best day. Eddie Kelly, transfer from Georgia Tech, had by far his best day. Williams Nwaneri, the 5-star freshman, he played 3 snaps, but he had 2 pressures last week. Johnny Walker, who should be their best defensive end and really hadn't done a lot this year, had the sack that kind of iced the game. And then Chris McClellan, the Florida transfer, defensive tackle. Like, if you ask me one guy who should be on the first team All-SEC ballot from Missouri, it's Chris McClellan, because of the season he's had. So there's nothing that stands out. Like, you don't look at any position and say they're exceptional here, but they're also just haven't been a lot of weaknesses.
Well, and I think there's something to be said about that, right? If you don't have, you may not be great at any one thing, but if you're good at everything, it kind of raises the overall floor of the operation, which that just seems to be how Mizzou is playing ball this year. The other thing I think that stuck out about Mizzou's defense, just when you look at the schedule, Boston College has a pretty mobile quarterback. Vanderbilt has a very mobile quarterback. They're about to play another one in Jalen Milroe, who has struggled the last few weeks for Alabama, but his ability to create out of structure has been one of his strengths. And Mizzou seems to be pretty comfortable playing a quarterback that can do that. Just what have you seen maybe from that aspect of Mizzou being able to rein in mobile quarterbacks or quarterbacks that are just comfortable extending plays, I guess?
Well, they've been different guys. I mean, in week 2, they played a mobile guy from Buffalo, CJ Agbana, I think, but they were ineffective. I mean, Buffalo couldn't do anything, so you didn't get much of a read there. Against Boston College, like, they weren't even rushing the quarterback. They were basically saying, Thomas Castellanos, just stand in the pocket. We don't think you can beat us throwing, and he couldn't beat him throwing. Then Diego Pavia is like, and you've seen him, he's different. Yes, he's a mobile quarterback, but he's one of these guys that, please let the play break down. He's a chaos quarterback, right? In the structure, he's fine, but when he's really good is when things go haywire. And so Missouri actually did a better job against him than most people have. He still was pretty good. And then oddly, the guy who hurt him with his legs more than anybody is Connor Wegman, who I don't think anybody would call a mobile quarterback, but he scrambled for 2 or 3 gigantic first downs against Missouri. So it's been confusing, and it'll be interesting. I think most people would say Milroe is the best combination of runner and thrower that Missouri's seen, right? Like, Pavia is just this wild run around and you don't know what he's going to do guy. Castellanos is really fast, but he's not a great passer. So Milroe, you can't just sit there and say, yeah, we're going to let you stay in the pocket, because with his wide receivers, he'll beat you that way, but at the same time, you don't want to get up 5 yards behind him and just leave him a lane to run either, because he can do that.
I'm curious which Milroe will get in this game, right? Because the first 3.5 games of the season, he looked like he was a legit Heisman guy. And then really the last few weeks, maybe not as much against Vanderbilt, but he had a few mistakes in that one. South Carolina, I thought, did a really good job of limiting his rushing ability. And then for sure, Tennessee did the same thing, but Tennessee might have the best defense in the country. Right. So how Mizzou is able to, can they take away the run in the same way that South Carolina and Tennessee did? Can they force him to, maybe go through his progressions and panic a little bit? I think Tennessee also did a pretty good job of that as well. They were able to get the pass rush going against Milroe, which kind of had him out of sorts pretty early. And you mentioned the Mizzou was able to get their pass rush going a little bit last week. And I wonder how that dynamic might work.
I think Missouri's best plan this week for Milroe might be, hey, can you trade for James Pierce? Like, is that doable? I think a lot of teams would like to do that.
That would be something. He was very, very impressive last week.
I mean, hey, there are no rules. There is no reason that kid could not transfer to Missouri in the next 48 hours, right? You can do anything you want.
You mentioned the pass rush, figuring some things out, I think, last week. What do you think has been the issue as to why they maybe haven't gotten going maybe as quickly as you guys thought they might this year?
Yeah, I mean, Johnny Walker was a guy that Look, Darius Robinson was the number one defense. He was first round draft pick, all that, had 8 or 9 sacks. And so Johnny Walker was the supporting role last year, right? Well, we just always assume, well, the number 2 guy can be the number 1 guy. Well, sometimes the number 2 guy is just a really good number 2 guy, and he's not a number 1 guy. And I'm not sure Missouri has a number 1 guy. Zion Young, honestly, looked like it last week, but I don't think the Auburn offensive line is necessarily getting nominated for the Moore Award this year or anything. So they'll have bigger tests going forward. I think Corey Batoon, this is a Corey Batoon game to me. Like, let's see what you got. What do you scheme up? You got to bring guys that Milroe doesn't know you're bringing. You got to confuse him. You got to figure out a way to get pressure on him, because I don't think Missouri can just line up with 4 guys and get to him. I mean, now and again, maybe, but I don't think they're going to line up with 4 and get to him on a regular basis.
No, that's especially if Milroe is able to, come back home, calm down a little bit, maybe figure out some of the rushing stuff. I think that could make life pretty difficult for Mizzou's defense. If it's any consolation, though, we've been running an EA College Football 25 simulation all season. Like we loaded up a dynasty mode to see, one, how accurate the game is, but 2, if some of these sims might tell us anything about this game. I don't know if this will make Mizzou fans feel better, but Johnny Walker Jr. finished our simulation, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. They picked off Milroe 4 times. Norwood had 2 of those interceptions. Newsome and Toriano Pride had the other ones. So I think 13 total tackles for loss. They were able to get after them a little bit in the sim. I don't know if that's exactly what's going to happen, but I don't know. The sim has also pretty accurately predicted Milroe's slide these last few weeks. Okay. So hey, maybe this is the autocorrect game for Mizzou's defense.
If you offered Eli Drinkwitz 13 tackles for loss and 4 interceptions today, I think you would say, I don't even need to play the game. We're good. Just give me those numbers and let's see what happens.
There are a lot of matchups that we've talked about here during our conversation, but a lot more that we haven't touched on yet that are probably going to decide or play a role in deciding Saturday's game. Gabe, when you look at these 2 teams, what matchups are you most intrigued by, or what matchups do you think are going to be crucially important to figuring out how this game gets decided?
Yeah, I think I think a big one is the left side of Missouri's offensive line against Alabama. Like I said, they haven't been great. Now, they've been better the last couple of weeks. Marcus Bryant had 13 pressures allowed, I think, in the first 5 weeks. I don't know what the numbers are, but he's gotten better. Caden Green was the offensive lineman of the week at UMass, played pretty well last week against Auburn. And especially if you're talking about a quarterback who we don't know if he can move. Like, he literally might be standing back there and they go, hey, if anybody comes, you just got to get rid of the ball. We don't know what to expect. I mean, I think it's hard to break down individual parts of this game when you've got the most important guy on one offense and you go, I don't know, A, if he's going to play, and B, if he does play, how good he can be, right? I mean, I made 2 separate predictions for this game because I have no clue what Brady Cook we're seeing, or if we're seeing Brady Cook. If Brady Cook doesn't play, like, Bama wins this game with 10 points.
The pass rush for Alabama has been a little hit and miss. When it's good, it's really good. And, LT Overton, one of the Texas A&M transfer who came over before Saban retired and decided to stay through the coaching transition, he's really good at winning his one-on-ones. When he gets double teamed, they do the job, right? They basically wash him out of the play. So he usually lines up on the left side. I know sometimes they'll move their defensive linemen around, so that could be the guy to watch. I'm also curious to see Alabama's run defense. I don't want to say it's bad, but it has been leaky at times this season. Right. Last week against Tennessee, they actually did a really good job of containing Dylan Sampson. They forced a fumble, I think the first fumble of his college career. But then in the second half, Nico hit a long run. Dylan Sampson ended up piling up, I think, 140 yards. So the Alabama's run defense can be had. And I wonder whether it's Cook or Drew Pine, this could be a somewhat of a Nate Noel game. I think if Mizzou's able to get the run going, that would help, I think, whatever the quarterback position is, because that helps maybe calm down the offense. It, again, maybe gives them a little bit of an easy button if they're able to get 3, 4, 5 yards here and there. I'm curious to see how that works. In addition to, I'm really intrigued by Alabama's defense in this game because Luther Burden's still dangerous. Theo Weiss has come on this year. And if Brady Cook, he's experienced, right? I'm of the belief that he can make the throws. And against Alabama's secondary, which is dealing with some injuries and some shuffling here and there, this might be the game where they finally hit a couple of those. And then next thing you know, we've got a rock fight in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to see, hey, Luther Burden and Theo Weiss, you're the best receiving core in the country. All right, this is the week you better show it, right? Because I don't think Missouri can win this game without a couple big plays, but the run defense will be interesting because I don't really think Nate Noel's going to play. So I think it's probably more likely to be Marcus Carroll, Jamal Roberts, true freshman Kewan Lacey. And I mean, Carroll is averaging around 5 yards a carry. He doesn't have the breakaway speed Nate Noel does, but he doesn't lose yardage. He's a good between the tackles runner. And if they can, again, help protect Brady a little bit with a little bit of the Vanderbilt game plan, can you just lean on these guys? Because Missouri's line has been better run blocking than it has in pass protection. So can you lean on them? Can we go just get 5 yards a carry and just make this rather than a 12 possession game, can we make this a 9 possession game and find a way to win 24-21, something like that? I think Missouri would be happy to do that.
Yeah, well, Vanderbilt did that, right? They went 12 of 18 on third downs. They were able to just find yards again and again and again. South Carolina had a drive out of halftime where they converted 5 consecutive third downs. They got Lenora Sellers going a little bit. Rocket Sanders was able to find some yards here and there. Tennessee, even after not really being able to run the ball at all in the first half, Josh Heupel stuck with it, and they were able to rip off some really big chunk plays in the second half. So there's some rushing yards to be had there for Missouri if they decide they want to commit to it. And I think, whether it's a less than 100% Brady Cook or Drew Pine back there at quarterback, I think that could help them quite a bit, which is why that matchup intrigues me so much. When you look at Mizzou's defense, what matchup against Alabama's offense intrigues you the most going into Saturday?
I mean, it's twofold, right? It's what is the plan for Milroe? I mean, and I don't know what that exactly is, obviously, but I'm just interested to see the approach. Is it because you can't stop everything? You're going to have to give up something, and I don't think you want to let Milroe just be able to run around, but I'm not sure you want to let him just sit back there either. So I'm not sure. And then it's kind of the same thing as it is on the Alabama side. Can you keep the receivers in front of you, right? I mean, hey, they're going to make some plays. You can live with it. You can't give up the 65-yard touchdown pass in this game, which is something Missouri's done a lot. They played a lot of zone this year. They're not really a man team because last year Missouri had 2 guys that were NFL draft picks at corner, and this year they've been, their third corner is now their first corner. Toriano Pride came over from Clemson and had a pick 6 in the first game, but frankly has been average, I would say, this year. So I think the receivers certainly probably scare Missouri a good amount.
Well, it makes them feel any better. It's really only been 2 receivers, Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard, who have been, right. I think, consistent is probably the word there. They've been dealing with some injuries behind those guys, just with, Cole Adams, who's their slot guy, Kobe Prentice, another slot guy. Kendrick Law is kind of a do everything dude that they'll send on end rounds and they'll throw him in the slot. And especially last week against Tennessee, the offense kind of flew through Ryan Williams, and I think he finished the game with 18 targets. He had 10 in the first half. It was really weird and really bizarre. So we'll see which version of the Alabama receivers show up, which version of Milroe shows up. I think that's going to tell us a lot about how that game might go. Alabama, Missouri, 2:30 Central kickoff time, ABC on Saturday. Gabe, appreciate you coming on Roll Pod to preview the Tigers and the Tide.
Appreciate you guys having me. Look forward to it.
Big thank you to Gabe and Power Mizzou for their time on today's show. Again, Alabama Mizzou kickoff at 2:30 Central on Saturday in Tuscaloosa. Games on ABC, and it's a big one for both teams. But that's all we've got today, guys. We'll bring the entire gang back together on Sunday to recap this game. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 24/7 and 24/7 Sports so you can get all of our great coverage on the Crimson Tide and all of Power Mizzou's great coverage of the Missouri Tigers. That's all we've got today, guys. I appreciate y'all listening. We'll talk to you soon.